We're into the quarterfinals of the Fide World Cup. I'm going to take you through the first game in the match between Magnus Carlsen and Etienne Bacrot. Don't forget to like, comment, share and subscribe, and do consider supporting us via Patreon. Check out the rewards if you become a subscriber on patreon.com PowerPlayChess. So here we go. Bacrot in this first classical game with the white pieces. So it's a Spanish and it goes right down one of the main lines. And I've said this before. I think that when Carlsen starts to play down main lines, I think that shows a kind of determination. It's a signal of intent. He is taking this tournament very, very seriously. He wants to test himself. He wants to see how he's doing in classical chess because, well, his eyes are on the World Championship match in November, of course. So he's feinting at playing the marshal, for example, after c3, d5. But Bacrot plays one of the many anti-marshal lines. You can play h3, d3, a3, lots of things, but he goes a4. Now this is one of the oldest anti-marshal lines. This was a line that I used to play way back. So bishop b7 is the standard move, d3, all good. And here knight c3 was, you could say, one of the old main lines. But Bacrot played bishop d2, and, well, by chance, it's a variation I've also played. I rather like this, actually. The bishop covers these squares. It's known in other positions, in similar positions. And it means that you're ready to play this idea with knight c3 and knight d5, but with the bishop controlling these squares. Obviously, prevents knight a5 if you want to prevent that move. So it was first played by Geller. And I remember studying this some time ago in the late 1980s, and I did claim a scalp with this move. My opponent, Mark Hebden, played b4 here and c3, and, well, that's another story. But anyway, Carlsen thought for 28 minutes here. Now that's a really long time. And played queen d7. Well, it doesn't look bad to connect those rooks. Knight c3. Here, Spassky played knight d4. Spassky and Korchnoi played knight d4 against Geller. But Carlsen played knight a5. Bishop dropped back to a2 and c5. So Carlsen is getting a big grip on the centre. Here, Bacrot played knight e2, obviously swinging it around here. I was kind of surprised he didn't play bishop g5. It's the kind of idea that Carlsen himself likes very much, just to exchange off bishop for knight and to occupy d5. I can imagine something like this happening. b4, takes, and the bishop probably dropping back to d8. You know, at some point black might be able to break out like this, or perhaps you maneuver this knight round here. But in any case, you know, white does have a little bit of light square control. But instead of that, knight e2 played, and now the knight drops back. Knight g3, and Carlsen took the opportunity to break with d5. So it does feel as though white, with these moves, with the manoeuvre around to g3 and the bishop on d2, has taken up a lot of time, and so it's tempting to play d5. But this does involve a pawn sacrifice. Pawn takes, knight takes. So, very typical position where white has the possibility to take here. You've got to watch out for potential action on this diagonal. Therefore, c3, useful move anyway to cover these squares and blocks the long diagonal. And now here you can see that the pawn on e5 is attacked. It's actually it's a very typical Spanish position, or sometimes you get these kind of positions from the gioco piano as well. And it's often a mistake for black to cover that pawn because it weakens not only this diagonal but this one as well. And it's possible for white to break out, or sometimes with d4. Sometimes you can play quite slowly. For example, put the pawn on h5 and even just duck the bishop back here and play for d4 to get some action on this diagonal. Not the kind of position that Carlsen likes. He likes the initiative. So he didn't bother defending this pawn. He played rook d8. Exchange on b5, and Bacrot accepted the pawn. And bishop d6, so you can see that, of course, there are some similarities with the marshal. I mean, white's king position isn't so compromised. But in the sense that black has play on the king side with these bishops, is obviously very common in the marshal. And, of course, this pawn is slightly weak. So that knight hitting these squares has to be eliminated, but now black at the very least has two bishops. But there isn't a lot wrong with white's position. Yes, this is weak. There are potential targets on the king side, but white's pieces are reasonably well placed. They're working together, but maybe this was the moment when Bacrot could have decided, okay, I just want to calm things down a bit. So, for example, a move like queen h5. Whoops. Yeah, in this position, queen h. I'm getting confused. Queen h5 here. Apologies for that. And yeah, just giving back a pawn, allowing this pawn on d3 to be taken, but this should be equal. But instead he played knight e4. Doesn't look too bad, but watch what happens. Queen c7. So that provokes a little weakness here. Queen h5 could be met by c4, undermining that knight. It's a little bit uncomfortable. So g3, the bishop drops back to e5. And now Bacrot was provoked. So he's already played g3, which weakens this diagonal, and now he played pawn to f4, knocking the bishop back. So you can see that white's king is opening up. Just compare the two kings. Normally in these situations, I always like to play with a safer king. White might be a pawn up, but this is dangerous. Obviously, if that knight exchanges off the bishop, then it's just a small step and then down the long diagonal. So queen h5. And here, actually, the engines think the immediate c4 is best, but queen c6 play doesn't look too shabby for black. And it's obvious that black has excellent compensation here. Queen h3 played. Bacrot falling back. Covering that square, but it's starting to look a bit shaky. c4, so undermining this piece. d4. And here the computers say that f5 is very strong. Let's just have a very quick look at that. So, for example, moves like this. Here, now check. The king can actually just step up, so it's not a problem. But rook a8 is a nice move. That causes a few problems here. And actually just giving up the exchange. And this is very powerful. And here's the trick. Bishop takes f4. That's the kind of little tactic that's easy to miss for both sides. And bishop e3 coming, obviously, there's a pin here. So f5 would have been good. Knight f2 possible. Queen f3. It's starting to look very unpleasant for white. And rook f6. And this one is coming. It's not a nice position. But Carlsen played, I think, a very human move. Rook e8. So he's not compromising his king in any way. Obviously a threat to take here. d5 played. And here Carlsen went for a daring queen sacrifice. He could have played queen b6 check. And then here's a really nice move, bishop b8. So, well, one window closes and another opens, basically. You know, this attack looks so powerful. Just fantastic position for black here and here. Just a beautiful battery, and it must be good for black. It's not over yet, but looks very promising. But Carlsen went for queen takes d5, which, to be fair, also looks very promising. So rook takes knight. So this is a fourth sequence of moves. And rook e8. So if rook takes bishop, of course that is checkmate. This is the problem. So very quickly Bacrot played rook e5. I should say that it was Carlsen who was using up quite a lot of time here, around about this position. And I've jotted down some times here. Yeah, Carlsen had something like 2 minutes left. Bacrot had a little bit more, something like 4 minutes. So in that situation, you know, it's difficult to sit there and calculate a forced win. Your time might just run out and it might all be in vain. You might not find a win. It's different when there's someone tapping you on the shoulder telling you, yeah, it's mate in 3. But Carlsen couldn't be sure. So he played for something that simply looks good. Here he took the rook and went for a position where it looked promising for black. In fact, there's a very, very neat way for black to force a win. Here, white has to take bishop c5 check. King steps back, and now bishop e4. The whole point of this is that this bishop has no moves. Also, black's position on the king side is solid enough. So, for example, it could go like this. Here, queen back, check. And now, here is the point. Black hits the bishop, and there is no good move. Bishop b1, obviously, rook a1, there's a pin. Well, if the queen goes in the corner, that's just too horrible to contemplate. I mean, black is going to win material using the pin. It's a beautiful idea. Again, this is a computer idea. The computer finds this very, very quickly. Here's another one. There we go. And white can't generate enough play on the king side. It's just too slow. This one is dropping. Beautiful idea. But Carlsen, running low on time, took this. I think this is very understandable. He couldn't find a forced win. He played something that looks good. So he's got rook, bishop and pawn. The king is still in trouble. Now he has to watch out for this move. So therefore bishop c8 knocks the queen back. And then put the bishop here. Now if pawn takes, then there's a check. And the king, well, it's going to have to step up sooner or later here. And you can take... And, well, I mean, this bishop is completely trapped. The king could march in the middle, or you can just do this, of course. This just wins the piece. So, not possible to take this. Queen d5. Best defense from Bacrot. Bishop e6. And these bishops are just, in combination with the rook, are very strong. And that bishop is such a poor piece. So Carlsen recognised that and recognised that this is a very, very difficult position for white. The computer thinks that white can still hold this, but it's like a series of only moves, basically. I mean, just let me give you a little example of the power of these bishops. If queen takes pawn, this did not happen, then check. And king just gets gets cut to bits. Can't say it. Rook b3, discovered check, and the queen drops. So Bacrot played queen c5. Bishop takes b2. And now the king steps out and it covers a few squares. It looks fantastic for black with these passed pawns on the queen side. In fact, it's not so simple. You know, if white can pick up one of these pawns, I think just for the moment, black's problem is that everything needs to be protected. You need to keep hold of everything, and that's not so easy. But Carlsen, short of time, found some excellent moves. Bishop d7, so that holds on to his his 2-pawn advantage. And here the computer indicates that queen c7 is the best move. Not an easy one to find. Bacrot played queen d5, which feels very natural. In fact, it's a losing move. Rook d8, threatening a big check. So the queen stepped away and now the bishop comes back. And Carlsen is close to getting coordination. You can see the bishop is now safe. It protects that rook. Bishop b1. Okay, looking to create some threats. Of course, Carlsen cuts that out. Now they've reached the time control. So Carlsen, well, with that move, he had time to just reflect and just check everything in the position. And this is now, well, should be winning for black, because black is ready to push these pawns and something is going to drop. The king is very exposed as well. g4 played. That's kind of a last desperate lunge. That was taken. That means that black's bishops won't be disturbed and this pawn advances. f5, trying to open it up. g5, good move. Keeps everything closed. And here Bacrot resigned. Well, as Carlsen said afterwards, basically everything is protected. You know, he was considering playing king g7, bishop h5, making sure everything is protected, and then going crazy with the rook somehow, because white just can't get a punch on black in that position. Let me show one line. So king f2, king g7, king up, bishop d1. Let's threaten to push the pawn. Now rook d2. Okay, we're going to take another pawn if possible. Queen back, a very depressing move to make. Check. Here, g4. Well, you can see that this position is no fun at all for white, and I think it's completely understandable that Bacrot resigned in this position. So first classical game goes to Carlsen. He has white tomorrow. He's looking good to go through to the semi-final. The other big result in this quarter-final was that Sam Shankland defeated Sergei Karyakin in a very nice endgame squeeze. Sam the man, can he make it through to the semi-finals? Let's see. Thanks very much for watching.